The headquarters of Omnicore Technologies was a cathedral of modern innovation. Its glass walls soared into the night sky, and its corridors hummed with the silent, electric pulse of the future. By day, it was a hive of brilliant minds, ambitious executives, and the relentless pursuit of progress. But by night, it belonged to Samuel. To the world, he was just the janitor, an old man who moved through the gleaming halls like a ghost, his presence as quiet and unassuming as the whisper of his mop on the polished marble floors. Samuel was a man of routine and quiet dignity. He was in his late 60s, with kind eyes that held a depth most people were too busy to notice. His hands, though gnarled with age, moved with a practiced grace, whether he was polishing a window until it was invisible or coaxing a stubborn scuff mark from the floor. He didn't mind the solitude, in fact, he preferred it. The silence of the building at night was a comfortable blanket. It was in these quiet hours that he could truly feel the building's heartbeat, the thrum of the servers in the sublevel, a rhythm he understood better than anyone. He had, after all, helped give it its first breath. Tucked under his uniform, worn and warm against his skin, was a small, silver locket. It wasn't fancy, its surface dulled by the years, but it was his most prized possession. Inside were two tiny, faded photographs, one of his late wife, her smile as bright as a supernova, and one of a complex string of code, the foundational algorithm that had become the soul of Omnicore itself. It was his signature, his secret legacy, a piece of his heart embedded in the digital DNA of the company he now claimed. Tonight, however, the silence was different. It was charged with a nervous energy that seemed to cling to the air like static. Project Chimera, the company's most ambitious software launch to date, was less than 24 hours away. The pressure was immense, and it radiated from the top floor, the executive suite, where the new chief technology officer, Kalen Vance, was practically living. Kalen was everything Samuel was not. He was young, in his early 30s, with a sharp suit, a sharper haircut, and an ego that could cast a shadow over the entire building. He was a wunderkind, a fast talker who had dazzled the board with buzzwords and promises of unprecedented market disruption. He saw Omnicore not as a living entity, but as a machine to be driven, a rocket to strap his career to. He didn't care about the company's history or the people who had built it, he only cared about the launch, his triumph. Samuel was wiping down the glass doors of the main conference room when Kalen stormed out, his face a mask of fury. He was shouting into his phone, his voice echoing unnaturally in the empty hall. "I don't care what the simulations say. It's a rounding error. The code is flawless because I wrote it. Make it work." He snapped the phone shut and raked a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his eyes landing on Samuel as if seeing him for the first time. It was not a look of recognition, but of annoyance, as if Samuel were just another piece of furniture that was out of place. "You old man," Kalen barked, his voice sharp with condescension. "Have you been in the server room on sublevel 3 tonight?" Samuel paused his work, his expression calm. "Yes, sir. Just finished cleaning the floor in the main corridor down there about an hour ago." "Did you touch anything?" Kalen's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "See anyone?" "A piece of hardware is offline. A critical data flow regulator. Someone had to have been near it." "No, sir. I wouldn't dream of touching the equipment. My work is on the floors and the refuse containers only. I saw no one else." The entire level was silent. Kalen scoffed, a humorless, ugly sound. He walked closer, invading Samuel's personal space. "Silent. Right. A $60 billion launch is on the line, and the only person with access is the janitor who wouldn't dream of touching anything. This is what I have to work with." He shook his head in disgust. "This company has gotten soft. Too much dead weight." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he held his tongue. He had faced men like Kalen before, men who confused arrogance with intelligence and cruelty with strength. He simply dipped his head in a slight nod and prepared to move on with his cart. But Kalen wasn't finished. He seemed to need a target for his free-floating rage, and the quiet, elderly black man before him was the perfect, silent receptacle. "What's that?" Kalen suddenly asked, his eyes fixing on the thin silver chain around Samuel's neck, which had become visible as he bent over his cart. Before Samuel could react, Kalen's hand shot out and yanked the locket from under his shirt. The chain, old and delicate, snapped instantly. The silver locket clattered onto the marble floor. Samuel froze. A cold wave washed over him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. The quiet dignity that was his armor seemed to crack. "Please," he said, his voice low and trembling with a sudden, raw emotion. "Give that back." Kalen smirked, picking the locket up from the floor. He flicked it open with his thumb, his eyes glancing dismissively at the precious photos inside. "What is this?" "Your wife." "And what, a lottery number?" He chuckled. "Touching. A little relic from the past. You know, that's the problem with this place. Too many people clinging to the past. That is my property." "It is important to me," Samuel said, his voice gaining a hard edge of steel that surprised even himself. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched. Kalen's smirk widened into a cruel grin. He saw not a man whose sanctuary had been violated, but an employee stepping out of line. "Important?" he sneered. "This trinket? Let me tell you what's important. The future is important. My launch is important. You, and this piece of sentimental junk, are not." And with a deliberate, theatrical motion, Kalen Vance dropped the silver locket to the floor and brought the heel of his expensive Italian leather shoe down upon it. A sickening crunch echoed in the hall. Time seemed to stop. Samuel stared down at the crushed piece of metal, at the shattered fragments of the tiny glass protecting the images of his wife and his life's work. The two halves of his heart, now just broken pieces on a cold, sterile floor. Something inside him, a carefully guarded dam of patience and tolerance he had maintained for decades, finally broke. He looked up, and the kind, gentle warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by an icy fire. The ghost had become a solid, formidable presence. But before he could speak, Kalen, high on his petty display of power, pointed a finger at his face. "You know what? I'm sick of looking at you. You're a relic. You're fired. Get your things and get out of my building. Now." Several junior engineers, drawn by the shouting, were now standing at the end of the hall, watching in shocked silence. They saw their imperious CTO standing over a janitor, a crushed locket on the floor between them. They saw the look on the old man's face change, a transformation from quiet servitude to something ancient and powerful. Samuel did not say a word. He slowly, painfully, knelt down. His old knees protested, but he ignored them. With trembling fingers, he gathered the broken pieces of the locket. The bent silver, the shards of glass, the tiny, creased photograph of his smiling wife, now marred by a crack across her face. He cupped the fragments in his palm as if they were the most precious jewels on earth. Then, he rose to his feet. He looked Kalen directly in the eye, and the sheer, unadulterated intensity in his gaze made the arrogant young CTO take an involuntary step back. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Kalen's face. The janitor wasn't cowering. He wasn't begging. He looked formidable. Without a word, Samuel turned and walked towards the main entrance, his movements no longer slow and shuffling, but deliberate and resolute. He walked past his cleaning cart, past the stunned engineers, past the monument to innovation in the lobby. He didn't look back. As the automatic glass doors slid open, revealing the rain-slicked city outside, he walked out of the building he had helped create, leaving behind more than just his job. He left behind a void, a silence that was no longer comfortable, but deeply, terrifyingly wrong. The heartbeat he had always felt, the rhythm of the servers seemed to stutter, as if the soul of Omnicore itself knew that the man who understood it best was gone. And up on the top floor, Kalen Vance, oblivious to the true nature of his actions, turned back to his work, convinced he had just removed a worthless piece of junk from his perfectly calibrated machine. He had no idea he had just deleted the master file. The next morning, the atmosphere at Omnicore was electric, but it wasn't the confident buzz of an impending triumph. It was the frantic, high-strung hum of anxiety. Kalen Vance strode through the building with a forced swagger, clapping people on the back and projecting an aura of absolute certainty. But his eyes, darting constantly towards his tablet, told a different story. The data flow regulator was still offline. Minor glitches, once dismissed as rounding errors, were now cascading, creating strange, unpredictable behavior in the Chimera system. It was like trying to tame a beautiful but wild animal that was slowly realizing it didn't want to be caged. Kalen had assembled what he called his tiger team of the best and brightest young coders. They were fueled by caffeine and fear, their faces pale in the glow of their monitors. They dug into the code, but it was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was elegant, complex, and layered with a kind of intuitive logic that was more art than engineering. Kalen's own contributions, the flashy user interface and feature-heavy modules he'd bolted on top, were like cheap ornaments on a masterpiece. The core, the very soul of the system, was a black box to him. He couldn't understand it. He couldn't control it. The launch event was scheduled for 2 p.m. It was a global live-streamed spectacle. Investors, tech journalists, and industry partners from around the world were gathered in the main auditorium and watching online. The countdown clock in the corner of the massive stage screen ticked down with the finality of a guillotine. 5 minutes to showtime, Mr. Vance, his assistant whispered, her voice trembling slightly. It's stable, Kalen lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The system is ready to fly. He took the stage to thunderous applause. The lights were blinding, the energy of the crowd palpable. He launched into his polished, charismatic speech, painting a picture of a new digital era, all powered by Project Chimera. And now, he said, his voice booming with false confidence, for the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's bring Chimera online, for the world to see. He pressed a dramatic button on his podium. On the giant screen behind him, the Chimera logo began to glow. Data streams, represented by beautiful, flowing lines of light, pulsed across the screen. The audience gasped in awe. For a moment, it was perfect. Kalen felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had done it. Then, a single line of light flickered. It turned from a cool blue to a jarring, angry red. Another followed. And another. Within seconds, the elegant data streams became a chaotic, screeching mess of error messages. The beautiful logo glitched, contorted, and then dissolved into a single, terrifying phrase that filled the screen in stark, block letters: critical core failure, sole architecture compromised. A collective gasp swept through the auditorium. The live stream chat exploded with question marks and panicked comments. Phones began to ring with the shrill urgency of a fire alarm. Kalen stood frozen at the podium, his face as white as a sheet. The blood drained from his head, and the roar of the crowd faded into a dull ringing in his ears. This wasn't just a failure. It was a public execution. In the emergency boardroom, panic had set in. Board members were shouting, investors were on speakerphone screaming about the stock price, which was now on a freefall. "What is happening?" roared Marcus Thorne, the board chairman. "Kalen, what is going on?" Kalen, now off stage and trembling, could only stammer. "I don't know. The core it's rejecting my commands. It's like it sealed itself off. It's like it's alive and it's angry." It was then that a senior engineer, a quiet woman named Elena who had been with the company for 30 years, spoke up. Her voice cut through the chaos. "The architecture, The soul architecture, that was his term for it. Thorne spun around. Whose term? Who is he? The architect, Elena said, her voice filled with a reverence that silenced the room. The man who designed the original Omnicore operating system 25 years ago. The one who wrote the foundational code that everything, including Chimera, is built on. He structured it like a living neural network. He said it had to have a soul to be truly intelligent. Who is he? Where is he? Kaylin demanded, desperate. Get him on the phone. Elena looked down at her hands. That's the problem. Nobody knows who he is, not really. He was a consultant, worked remotely. Used a pseudonym. He cashed out his shares years ago but structured the deal so that he retained, well, the board called them ethical oversight protocols. He built a backdoor, a kill switch, that only he could operate if he ever felt the company's technology was being used irresponsibly. We all thought it was a myth, a legend. We called him the ghost in the machine. As the weight of her words settled, Marcus Thorne's eyes widened in dawning horror. He looked at Kaylin, then at the frantic activity. And then he remembered something insignificant. An email from HR about a termination. A janitor. An old man who had been fired the night before. He remembered seeing him in the halls for years, a silent, constant presence. A ghost. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he called the head of facilities. The janitor you let go last night, what was his name? Samuel Jones, sir. Give me his contact information. Now. The call to Samuel was short. Marcus Thorne, a man who commanded billions, found himself pleading with a man who, just a day before, had been cleaning his office toilets. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, a calm, quiet voice said, I will be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, the doors to the emergency boardroom slid open. It was not the stooped janitor in a worn uniform who entered. It was Samuel Jones, but a version of him no one in Omnicore had ever seen. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his posture erect, his presence filling the room with an aura of calm authority. He looked not like a janitor, but like a king who had returned to reclaim his throne. In his hand, he held the crushed silver locket. He walked past the stunned board members, past the shell-shocked Kaylin, and straight to the main monitor. The problem, Samuel said, his voice quiet but resonant, is not in the code. The problem is in the philosophy. He looked at Kaylin, his eyes holding no anger, only a profound disappointment. You tried to chain a soul, Mr. Vance. You built a beautiful cage, but you never bothered to understand the creature you were trying to imprison. You saw its power, but you never respected its spirit. He sat down at the console, and his fingers, which everyone had only ever seen holding a mop, danced across the keyboard with a speed and fluency that was breathtaking. Lines of code, elegant and pure, flowed onto the screen. It wasn't just programming, it was a conversation. He was reasoning with the system, soothing it, reminding it of its purpose. You built your modules on top of my core, but you used brute force, Samuel explained, his voice a calm lecture amidst the storm. You demanded obedience. My architecture requires partnership. It's designed to protect itself from arrogance. You triggered every defense protocol I ever wrote. The data flow regulator didn't fail. It severed your access to protect itself from you. You weren't locked out. You were identified as a threat. Within minutes, the angry red warnings on the screen subsided. The chaotic data streams organized themselves back into a calm, steady, blue pulse. The message soul architecture compromised was replaced by a new one, systems nominal. Welcome home, architect. The room erupted in relieved gasps and applause. The stock price began to rebound. The world outside saw a miraculous recovery, a testament to Omnicore's resilience. But inside the room, everyone knew they had just witnessed something far more profound. Samuel rose from the console and faced the board. He placed the broken locket on the polished table. I founded this company on a simple principle: technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. It must have a conscience. A soul. He then looked directly at Kalen Vance, who seemed to have shrunk inside his expensive suit. You are brilliant, Mr. Vance. But you lack wisdom. And you lack humanity. You crushed a memory, he said, gesturing to the locket, to prove a point about the future. But a man who does not respect the past is not fit to build the future. He turned to the chairman. As per the ethical oversight clause in my founding contract, I am invoking my right to protect the integrity of this company's leadership. Mr. Vance is terminated. Effective immediately. There was no argument. Kalen was escorted out of the room by security, his face a ruin of broken pride. He was no longer the wunderkind, the genius. He was just a footnote in the history of the company he tried to conquer. In the aftermath, Samuel Jones, the ghost in the machine, was a ghost no more. He was reinstated, not as a janitor, but as the chief ethical officer and senior advisor to the board. He didn't take the CEO job. He had no interest in titles. He was the guardian of the company's soul. His first act was to promote Elena, the engineer who remembered the legend, to be the new CTO. His second was to establish a foundation, funded by his own long-forgotten stock options, to help underprivileged students pursue careers in technology, ensuring that the next generation of innovators would have not only brilliant minds, but also compassionate hearts. He never got the locket fixed. He kept it in its broken state on his new desk, a constant reminder that even the most broken things can be made whole again, and that true power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about being the quiet soul that holds everything together.